On the evening of November 6, 1817, an uneasy silence settled over Britain. In the elegant drawing rooms of London, in humble cottages, in busy workshops and crowded taverns, people waited anxiously for news from Claremont House. The only legitimate grandchild of King George III, the young woman destined to inherit the British throne, had been in labour for almost 2 days. Then the news arrived. The baby was dead. A few hours later, Princess Charlotte herself was gone. She was only 21 years old. Across Britain, church bells tolled in mourning. Shopkeepers closed their businesses. Black fabric disappeared from merchants' shelves as thousands dressed in mourning. Hardened soldiers wept openly. One newspaper wrote that the nation seemed to have lost its daughter. It was an extraordinary reaction. Charlotte was not yet queen. She had never ruled the country. She had accomplished no great military victories or political reforms. So why did her death break Britain's heart? Long before Princess Charlotte was born, her parents had become unwilling actors in a royal drama that neither of them had chosen. In the early 1790s, the Prince of Wales, later King George IV, was the most fashionable man in Britain. Charming, intelligent, and impeccably dressed, he surrounded himself with artists, musicians, and the finest society London had to offer. But behind the glittering facade lay a serious problem. He was drowning in debt. Years of extravagant spending had left him owing enormous sums of money. At the same time, he had secretly married the Catholic widow Maria Fitzherbert, a union that was both illegal and invalid under British law. As a Catholic, she could not legally become queen, and because the king had never consented to the marriage, it carried no constitutional weight. The government was willing to rescue the prince financially, but at a price. If he married a suitable Protestant princess and produced an heir to secure the succession, Parliament would settle many of his debts. Reluctantly, George agreed. The bride chosen for him was his first cousin, Princess Caroline of Brunswick, the daughter of the Duke of Brunswick and Princess Augusta, George III's sister. On paper, she seemed an acceptable match. She was Protestant, of royal blood, and politically suitable. Neither the bride nor the groom had any say in the arrangement. They exchanged portraits, but had never met. When Caroline finally arrived in England in April 1795, everyone expected an elegant first meeting between the future king and queen. Instead, witnesses described one of the most disastrous introductions in royal history. George took one look at Caroline and was visibly shocked. According to several contemporary accounts, she appeared tired after the long journey from Germany. Her clothes were unfashionable by London standards, and she had made little effort to adapt to English court etiquette. Some observers also remarked that her breath carried a noticeable odour, possibly the result of poor dental health or the hardships of travel. Whether these descriptions were exaggerated by George's supporters has been debated by historians, but there is no doubt that the prince reacted with immediate revulsion. Turning to Lord Malmesbury, the diplomat who had arranged the marriage negotiations, George is said to have muttered, "Harris, I am not well. Pray get me a glass of brandy." After drinking the brandy, he reportedly added, "I am not well. She is not so handsome as her portrait." Caroline, meanwhile, was hardly impressed by the prince herself. The handsome young prince she had imagined was, in reality, 32 years old, considerably overweight, heavily powdered, elaborately dressed, and visibly intoxicated. His face bore the marks of years of rich living, and his elaborate appearance struck Caroline as ridiculous rather than regal. After observing him for a few moments, She reportedly whispered, "Mon Dieu, is the prince always like that? I thought him very fat, and he is nothing like as handsome as his portrait." If either had hoped first impressions would improve, they were disappointed. 3 days later, on the 8th of April 1795, they stood together in the Chapel Royal at St James's Palace and exchanged wedding vows. George was said to have been so drunk during the ceremony that he struggled to remain attentive. The marriage was a political contract, not a love match. That night, the newlyweds finally found themselves alone. The prince later claimed that he had been so intoxicated he spent much of the wedding night asleep by the fireplace rather than with his bride. Whether that account was exaggerated is impossible to know, but what happened afterward is better documented. George himself later remarked that they had shared a bed only 3 times during their marriage. One of those occasions resulted in a pregnancy. 9 months later, on January 7, 1796, Caroline gave birth to a healthy daughter, Princess Charlotte. George famously observed that since the couple had produced an heir and done their duty, there was no further reason for them to live together. Within a year of the wedding, they had separated permanently. Charlotte would grow up caught between 2 parents who could scarcely bear to be in the same room together. Their bitter quarrels, public insults, and relentless struggle for influence over their only child would shape the future princess's entire childhood, and ultimately, the woman she would become. Charlotte would never know the comfort of a united family. Instead, she grew up moving between 2 households that could not have been more different. At Carlton House, where her father lived, discipline, duty, and royal protocol governed every aspect of her education. George believed that his daughter should be raised as the future sovereign of Britain and expected obedience from everyone around him. Her mother's home offered a striking contrast. Princess Caroline of Brunswick cared little for the rigid etiquette of the royal court. She laughed loudly, spoke her mind without hesitation, and surrounded herself with lively company. Courtiers often dismissed her as eccentric or even scandalous, but Charlotte found something there that was often missing elsewhere: warmth, spontaneity, and genuine affection. She adored spending time with her mother. Those precious visits, however, became increasingly difficult. The bitter conflict between George and Caroline soon developed into a struggle over their daughter. George tightened his control over Charlotte's upbringing and gradually restricted Caroline's access to her. Weeks sometimes passed without the two seeing one another, while mother and daughter exchanged affectionate letters whenever they could. The situation became even more painful in 1806. Rumours about Caroline's private life had been circulating for years, and an official inquiry, later known as the Delicate Investigation, examined allegations that she had behaved immorally and had even secretly given birth to an illegitimate child. Although the investigators failed to prove the most serious accusations, the scandal dominated public attention and further poisoned the relationship between Charlotte's parents. For the young princess, the politics meant little. What she saw was a mother publicly humiliated and a father determined to keep her at a distance. Visits became more carefully controlled, and every reunion seemed overshadowed by the hostility between her parents. Charlotte learned a painful lesson at an early age. Showing affection to one parent often felt like betraying the other. Those closest to Charlotte soon realised that she was unlike most royal children. She inherited her father's quick intelligence, lively wit, and gift for conversation. But from her mother, she inherited something the royal household found far more troublesome: a fiercely independent spirit. Even as a child, Charlotte reportedly declared that she hoped to become a good queen. It was a simple remark, but one that hinted at an early awareness of the responsibilities awaiting her, and perhaps of the unhappy example set by the adults around her. She loved horses from an early age and soon became an accomplished rider, often alarming her attendants by galloping faster and more fearlessly than they considered suitable for a young princess. She delighted in dancing, enjoyed music and long walks, and possessed a mischievous sense of humour. One of her favourite amusements was imitating the exaggerated bows, solemn expressions, and pompous manners of courtiers, sending those around her into fits of laughter. But beneath the playful exterior lay genuine kindness. Servants remembered that Charlotte spoke to them with warmth and courtesy rather than distant formality, treating them as people rather than simply members of the royal household. It was a small gesture, but one that earned her sincere affection. As she grew older, the qualities that made Charlotte so lovable also made her increasingly difficult to control. She questioned decisions instead of accepting them blindly, argued with tutors when she believed they were wrong, and refused to conceal her opinions simply because she was expected to remain silent. One contemporary observed that she possessed all the spirit of her father without his selfishness, while another described her as warm-hearted but almost impossible to manage. By the time she entered her teenage years, it was becoming clear that Britain did not have a quiet, obedient future queen. It had a princess determined to make her own choices, and before long, those choices would bring her into direct conflict with the most powerful man in Britain, her own father. By the time Princess Charlotte reached her late teens, Britain had changed dramatically. King George III's mental illness had become permanent, leaving him incapable of ruling. In 1811, Parliament appointed Charlotte's father as Prince Regent, making him the effective ruler of the kingdom. The young princess had grown accustomed to disappointment. She rarely saw her mother, whose public reputation had been damaged by years of scandal and political attacks. Her relationship with her father had become increasingly strained. George admired Charlotte's intelligence and knew she was immensely popular with the British people, but he also expected complete obedience. Charlotte, however, had inherited too much of her mother's independent spirit to become anyone's puppet. As heir to the throne after her father, Charlotte's marriage was no longer merely a family matter. It had become a question of national importance. The Prince Regent believed it was his duty to choose a husband who would strengthen Britain's position in Europe. Charlotte believed that the decision should also be hers. The disagreement would soon become one of the most talked about royal controversies of the age. Among the many princes considered as potential husbands, one appeared especially suitable: William, hereditary Prince of Orange, the future King of the Netherlands. He was handsome, well-born, and politically acceptable. At first, Charlotte liked him. He was courteous, intelligent, and treated her with respect. Their growing friendship soon convinced many that the match was certain. But as the negotiations continued, Charlotte learned something that changed everything. If she married William, she would be expected to spend much of her life in the Netherlands. For most royal brides, this would have been accepted without question. Charlotte refused. She loved Britain. More importantly, she believed that the future sovereign should live among the people she would one day rule. Leaving the country for years at a time seemed incompatible with her duty as Britain's future queen. Her father was furious. To George, this was not simply a disagreement between father and daughter. It was an act of defiance against the authority of the crown itself. Ministers attempted to persuade Charlotte to reconsider, warning her that refusing such a marriage could damage Britain's diplomatic interests. Charlotte remained unmoved. She admitted that she admired William, but insisted that she could not sacrifice her future responsibilities or her own conscience for political convenience. The engagement quietly collapsed. For the first time, the British public witnessed something remarkable. A princess had refused a politically advantageous marriage because she believed it was wrong. Many admired her courage. Others condemned her stubbornness. George saw only disobedience. The conflict between father and daughter had now become impossible to ignore. Before long, their quarrel would explode into one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of the British royal family. An episode that saw the future queen flee her father's palace in the middle of the night. The collapse of her engagement to the hereditary Prince of Orange had done little to calm the Prince Regent's determination to control his daughter. If anything, George became even more convinced that Charlotte needed firmer discipline. The princess felt differently. At 20 years old, she believed she had the right to decide whom she would marry and how she would live. Instead, she found herself watched constantly, her correspondence monitored, and her movements increasingly restricted. To Charlotte, Carlton House no longer felt like a royal residence. It felt like a prison. The final quarrel came in July 1814. George demanded that Charlotte leave London and live wherever he chose, surrounded by people appointed by him. Charlotte refused. Their argument grew so heated that she feared her father would isolate her completely from the few people she trusted. That evening, she made a decision almost unimaginable for a princess. She would leave. Without ceremony, without royal escorts, Charlotte quietly slipped out of Carlton House and climbed into a hired carriage. Her destination was her mother's residence at Connaught Place. It was an extraordinary act. The future Queen of Great Britain had run away from home. Princess Caroline welcomed her daughter with delight, but both women soon realised that Charlotte's escape had created a constitutional crisis. The Prince Regent's daughter had disappeared without his permission. Within hours, ministers, courtiers, and members of the royal household were scrambling to decide what should happen next. Newspapers quickly learned of the dramatic events, and before long, London was buzzing with rumours. Many people sympathised with Charlotte. For years, the public had watched the bitter feud between George and Caroline. Now it appeared that the young princess had finally rebelled against her father's authority. The Prince Regent, however, had no intention of allowing his daughter to dictate the terms of their relationship. Senior politicians, including the Prime Minister, visited Charlotte and gently but firmly explained that remaining with her mother would only deepen the crisis. Painful as it was, they persuaded her that she must return. The following day, Charlotte reluctantly left her mother's house. She had not won her freedom, but something had changed. For the first time, she had openly challenged the authority of the Prince Regent before the entire nation. The public admired her courage. George regarded her actions as little short of rebellion. Father and daughter would never fully trust one another again. Yet in the midst of this family conflict, another chapter of Charlotte's life was quietly beginning. Among the many European princes introduced to Britain's future queen was a thoughtful young German prince who possessed neither immense wealth nor overwhelming political influence. His name was Leopold of Saxe-Coburg. Unlike so many others, he did not try to control Charlotte, he simply listened. When Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg first arrived in England in 1816, few imagined that this quiet young German prince would soon capture the heart of Britain's future queen. Unlike many of Charlotte's previous suitors, Leopold possessed neither a great kingdom nor vast political influence. At 25, he had served with distinction in the Russian army during the wars against Napoleon and had earned a reputation for intelligence, self-discipline, and calm judgment. Yet it was not his military career that impressed Charlotte. It was his character. Leopold was everything the princess had rarely encountered in her own family. He listened more than he spoke. He was patient where others were demanding, thoughtful where others were calculating, and remarkably free of the arrogance that often accompanied royal rank. Charlotte, by contrast, entered every room like a burst of energy. She laughed easily, spoke her mind without hesitation, and rarely concealed her emotions. Friends often described her as lively and impulsive. Leopold was quiet and reflective. Their differences proved to be their greatest strength. Rather than trying to change Charlotte, Leopold encouraged her to be herself. He listened to her frustrations about court life, sympathized with the painful divisions within her family, and treated her not merely as the future Queen of Britain, but as a young woman longing to be understood. For perhaps the first time in her life, Charlotte found someone who neither tried to control her nor expected her to become someone she was not. Their affection deepened quickly. The surviving letters exchanged between them reveal a relationship filled with warmth, playful teasing, and genuine tenderness. Charlotte eagerly counted the days until they could meet again, while Leopold affectionately referred to her as his beloved Shah. Far from the formal language expected of royal correspondence, their letters reveal two young people discovering that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Not everyone approved. Some questioned whether Leopold's modest income and relatively small German duchy made him a suitable husband for the future Queen of Britain. Others suspected that he sought influence rather than love. Charlotte paid little attention. After years of resisting marriages arranged for political advantage, she had finally found someone she wished to marry for herself. The Prince Regent could hardly fail to notice the change in his daughter. The rebellious young princess who had argued with ministers and fled from Carlton House now seemed calmer and happier than anyone could remember. Even George, despite years of conflict with Charlotte, gradually accepted the match. Parliament voted Leopold a generous annual income, and preparations for the royal wedding began. On May 2nd, 1816, Princess Charlotte married Prince Leopold in the Crimson Drawing Room at Carlton House. The ceremony was magnificent, but it was the bride and groom themselves who captured everyone's attention. Witnesses remarked on Charlotte's radiant happiness. Leopold, usually reserved, could scarcely hide his emotion. As the couple drove through the streets of London after the ceremony, enormous crowds gathered to cheer them. People climbed onto rooftops, filled windows, and packed every available space simply to catch a glimpse of the newlyweds. For the first time in many years, Britain celebrated not scandal or family quarrels, but genuine happiness within the royal family. The newly married couple settled at Claremont House in Surrey. There, away from the endless intrigues of court, Charlotte discovered something she had never truly known: home. She rode through the countryside with Leopold, spent quiet evenings reading aloud beside the fire, welcomed friends without excessive ceremony, and began imagining the future they would build together. After a childhood overshadowed by conflict and years spent fighting for the right to make her own choices, Charlotte had finally found peace. She often remarked that she had never been so happy. Neither she nor Leopold could have imagined how heartbreakingly brief that happiness would prove to be. For nearly 18 months after their wedding, Princess Charlotte and Prince Leopold lived the quiet life they had always hoped for. When it became known that Charlotte was expecting her first child, Britain rejoiced. The unborn baby represented far more than another royal birth. It promised stability for the House of Hanover and secured the succession for another generation. Newspapers followed Charlotte's pregnancy with excitement, while ordinary people eagerly awaited the arrival of the future heir to the throne. Charlotte herself approached motherhood with joy and quiet confidence. She remained active throughout her pregnancy, continued taking carriage rides and gentle exercise, and spoke often of the child she and Leopold were expecting. Then came the autumn of 1817. On the evening of November 3rd, Charlotte went into labour at Claremont House. At first, there seemed little cause for concern. The finest physicians in the kingdom attended her, while Leopold remained close by, refusing to leave his wife's side for long. But the hours passed, then an entire day. Still the child was not born. Exhausted by nearly 2 days of labour and weakened by the strict medical treatment considered appropriate at the time, Charlotte struggled on with extraordinary courage. Finally, late on the night of November 5th, she delivered a baby boy. He was stillborn. The little prince, for whom Britain had waited so anxiously, never took a single breath. The grief inside Claremont House was overwhelming. Yet there was still hope. Charlotte appeared calm and even spoke cheerfully with those around her. She comforted Leopold, thanked her doctors, and seemed to be recovering. For a few precious hours, everyone believed the worst had passed. Then, suddenly, everything changed. Shortly after midnight, Charlotte suffered a severe hemorrhage. Her strength began to fade. Doctors could do almost nothing. In the early hours of November 6, 1817, Princess Charlotte died. She was 21 years old. Leopold was devastated. Unable to face the sight of his wife's body, he is said to have wandered the grounds of Claremont in profound grief. Friends feared for his health as he withdrew almost completely from the world around him. Years later, even after becoming the first king of the Belgians, he continued to keep Charlotte's memory alive and never forgot the brief happiness they had shared. Britain reacted with a grief unlike anything seen for generations. Church bells tolled across the country, theatres closed, shopkeepers covered their windows in black cloth. Families who had never met the princess wept openly. One contemporary wrote that it seemed as though every household had lost one of its own. The nation mourned not only Charlotte herself, but the future she had represented. She was young, she was popular. Many believed she would become the queen who restored warmth and dignity to a monarchy damaged by years of scandal and family conflict. That future vanished in a single night. Yet Charlotte's death changed British history forever. The tragedy exposed a frightening reality. King George III was old and gravely ill. The Prince Regent had no surviving legitimate children. The royal family suddenly realised that the House of Hanover stood dangerously close to running out of heirs. The king's unmarried sons hurried to find wives and produce legitimate children. One of them, the Duke of Kent, soon welcomed a daughter. She was born in 1819. Her name was Victoria. The world remembers Queen Victoria as the monarch who gave her name to an age. But had Princess Charlotte lived beyond the age of 21, Victoria would almost certainly never have worn the British crown. Charlotte's reign never began, yet her life and her death changed the course of British history forever.